had never been to a high-stakes auction before. He was just a small-time trader, wandering through the glittering corridors of the space station's market district. Everywhere he looked, wealthy collectors were shouting over paddles, their voices echoing across the massive hall. Robots rolled by carrying rare artifacts in polished cases, and holographic displays projected the prices of exotic goods, alien jewelry, rare starship parts, and even bottles containing strange, unknown substances. Felt a little out of place. His life was simple, and he had never cared for rare treasures. But there was something about the excitement of the auction that pulled him in, like a current too strong to resist. As he walked past row after row of glowing containers, his eyes settled on one in the far corner. It was dusty, scratched, and looked forgotten. The label was faded, and the auctioneer barely mentioned it as he skipped past. Nobody had bid on it yet, paused. There was nothing special about it, nothing to suggest it held value. Yet somehow it called to him. Maybe it was the way it seemed to hum faintly, almost like it had a heartbeat, or maybe it was just his imagination. Still felt a strange pull he could not explain. He walked closer and ran his fingers along the cold metal. A tiny spark jumped to his hand, harmless but startling. He smiled nervously, looking around. No one was paying attention. The auctioneer called out another lot, and the room buzzed with excitement elsewhere. Hesitated, then lifted his paddle on a whim. It was almost a joke. Surely nobody would mind. The hammer fell. "Sold!" the auctioneer shouted, barely noticing. Blinked. Just like that, the container was his. He carried it through the crowded hall, feeling the weight of the unknown in his hands. Other bidders barely glanced at him. He could feel the hum growing stronger, a vibration that seemed almost alive. By the time he reached his small transport ship, he was filled with both excitement and unease. Something about this container was different. Something about it felt aware. Set it down carefully on the cargo bay floor. He studied the panels. They were plain, no buttons, no screens. Yet when he pressed his hand against the surface, the metal shifted slightly, almost like it was breathing. His pulse quickened. He leaned closer. "What are you hiding?" he whispered. Of course, there was no answer, just the faint hum and the weight of mystery. The next hours were spent trying to open it. Tried every combination he could think of, pressing patterns on the surface, using his ship's scanners, even gently shaking it. The container resisted, almost as if it were alive, protecting itself. He felt frustration rising, but also fascination. There was no way to tell what was inside, no instructions, no warnings, nothing. Only the hum that grew louder when he got closer, softer when he stepped back. Night fell over the station, and found himself sitting beside it, exhausted but unwilling to leave. He remembered stories of humans who had discovered alien artifacts and had changed their lives forever. He didn't know if this was one of those stories, but he hoped it was. Something deep inside him whispered that the container was special, that it was waiting for him, not for anyone else. Then, as he finally closed his eyes, the container shivered. A tiny hiss of air escaped from its edges. Eyes shot open. The hum had changed, rising in pitch like a heartbeat racing with fear or excitement. He didn't know if he was scared or thrilled. Somehow he felt that his life was about to change, that this simple, forgotten container would bring something extraordinary into his world. And somewhere deep down realized, whatever came out of it would not be something he could control. Whatever was inside would be wild, untamed, and unlike anything he had ever imagined. The auction had seemed ordinary, the container worthless, but now understood that life often hid the most incredible things in plain sight, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to take a chance. He leaned back against the wall of his ship, heart pounding, staring at the container. Tomorrow, he promised himself he would open it, and somehow he already knew that his life would never be the same again. The next morning woke before the station's usual bustle. Sunlight spilled through the observation window, painting the cargo bay in warm gold. The container sat in the center, silent and still, but felt it differently now. The hum from yesterday had returned, stronger and sharper, almost impatient. He stepped closer, hands trembling, unsure if excitement or fear held him. The container seemed to pulse with energy, as if waiting for a signal he didn't know how to give. Circled it slowly, studying every seam and ridge. The metal walls shimmered faintly in the morning light. Tiny patterns, invisible before, appeared across the surface. He leaned closer, tracing them with his finger. Then, without warning, the container hissed, a thin streak of vapor escaping from a corner, jumped back, heart pounding. He realized the container wasn't just a box, it was alive in some way he couldn't yet understand. He took a deep breath and decided to try something daring. Pressing his palm against the largest panel, he pushed lightly, hopping for a release. The metal gave a little, then snapped back. Again he tried, this time pressing harder, holding his breath. A bright pulse of light shot from the seams and felt heat ripple across his face. The hum became louder, vibrating in his chest, vibrating in the floor. And then, there was movement. A shape emerged from the container, not rushing, not chaotic, but deliberate. At first, could barely make it out. A shadow, a silhouette, taller than any human he had ever seen, moving with grace and strength. Then color appeared, shimmering skin that shifted between hues like sunlight on water. Eyes, large and bright, opened and fixed on him. They were not human, yet they held intelligence, curiosity, and a spark of mischief. Stumbled backward, almost tripping over a crate, speechless. The figure stepped fully into the light. Her hair, if it could be called hair, flowed like liquid, changing shade with every movement. Her features were sharp but beautiful, alien yet somehow familiar. She looked around, taking in the cargo bay, the walls, himself. Every movement was careful, measured, like a predator testing the wind. Realized she was strong, agile, untamed. Not something to own, not something to control. And yet she seemed curious, as if she had been waiting for him to appear. Swallowed hard, trying to speak, but no words came. Instead, he reached out slowly, palm open. She flinched, stepping back, eyes narrowing. He froze, not wanting to scare her. Slowly, he lowered his hand. She tilted her head, studying him, her gaze intense and unwavering. Felt a strange connection, a pull deeper than logic or reason. She was alive. She was free. And somehow she had chosen to trust him, even if only a little. Hours passed in silence. Offered her water, gestures, even a small piece of fruit from his ration pack. She ignored it at first, watching him, circling him, learning. Her movements were fluid, unpredictable, yet graceful. Every small step she took made his heart race. He felt like he was witnessing something sacred, something that had never belonged in human hands until now. By evening, she moved closer on her own, leaning briefly against a wall. Saw the subtle tension in her muscles relax just slightly. It was a start. She had come from a container no one wanted, abandoned and forgotten, yet she carried strength, intelligence, and a wild spirit could feel in his chest. He realized she wasn't a prisoner or a curiosity. She was a being with her own purpose, her own will, and that made her more extraordinary than anything he had ever imagined. As the sun set behind the station, sat near the container, watching her. The light in her eyes reflected the fading gold. He whispered softly, "I don't know what you are or where you came from, but I think I want to find out." She didn't respond, but she didn't move away either, and for the first time felt a flicker of hope that this encounter, so strange and unexpected, might not be frightening at all, but the beginning of something incredible. The next morning woke to find the alien woman sitting across from him, her legs folded neatly as she studied him. He had decided to call her Lyra, a name that felt right for the mysterious light in her eyes. She didn't speak, and knew that words would not reach her, not yet. Her gaze followed every movement he made, and he realized she was learning, observing, weighing him as carefully as he weighed her. He tried offering food. A small tray of rations hovered near her, and he extended a hand, smiling softly. Lyra recoiled, her body tensing like a spring ready to snap. Froze. He understood in that moment. She had been confined for a long time, trapped in the container, and she did not understand kindness or trust. She only understood survival. Every step he had taken was under her watchful eye, every breath measured. Days passed, tried different approaches. He spoke gently, sang softly, and even sketched shapes on a hopping she might recognize patterns or meaning. Each time she studied him, but her reactions were unpredictable. Sometimes she would flinch and retreat, other times she would tilt her head and move closer. She was untamable. That thought frightened at first. He had wanted companionship, curiosity, maybe even friendship, but he realized now that he could not demand it. Lyra had her own will, and that made her even more extraordinary. One afternoon decided to test her limits gently. He extended his hand and placed it near hers. Lyra froze, eyes narrowing, her body coiling like a spring. For a tense moment, thought she might strike or flee. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, her fingers twitched toward his. It was not trust, yet, but it was curiosity. His chest tightened with a mix of relief and awe. Here was a creature from beyond the stars, untamed and wild, daring to reach for a human hand for the first time. Evenings were the hardest. Lyra would pace near the observation window, her shadow long and elegant against the walls. She seemed fascinated by the stars, tracing constellations with her fingers. Tried to join her, pointing to planets to familiar patterns in the sky, but she barely acknowledged him. She was independent, untouchable, yet the faint traces of connection were growing. Understood that this was no ordinary relationship. He couldn't command her. He could only wait, patient and respectful, hoping she might accept him on her own terms. Then one night disaster struck. A sudden alarm rang through the ship, an unauthorized boarding signal. Pirates realized instantly. He grabbed his blaster, ready to protect himself. Lyra's reaction was immediate. She leaped into action with fluid speed, her movements almost hypnotic. She disarmed one intruder with a sweep of her arm, another with a precise kick, and moved with terrifying grace. Could only watch, heart hammering, as this being he barely knew defended him and the ship. After the pirates fled, found her standing silently, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something deeper, something like respect. He understood that in this violent moment she had made a choice. She had acted not out of command, not because he had ordered it, but because she had decided he was worth defending. His throat tightened. Lyra was untamable, unpredictable, and fierce. But she was also capable of loyalty, of care, and of connection on her own terms. As the adrenaline faded, sat on the floor beside her. He didn't speak, she didn't move. And yet something had shifted. The silent bond between them had grown stronger, forged in the heat of fear and survival. Realized that this was not the kind of friendship he had imagined. It was something deeper, something wild and alive. Lyra would never be tamed. She would never belong to him. And yet she had chosen to be near him, to share space, to exist alongside a human who had dared to see her not as a creature, but as a being. Looked at Lyra, heart full of awe and humility. He knew then that the journey ahead would be full of challenges, full of moments he could not control. And he didn't mind. Because in that untamed, wild spirit before him saw something human too. The courage to be free, the courage to trust, and the courage to love even across the stars made a decision. He could no longer keep Lyra on the station where curious humans might come too close or authorities might intervene. He needed space, literally. He packed his ship for a long journey to the edge of known space, a place far from prying eyes, where Lyra could explore and he could learn who, or what she truly was. The first hours of travel were tense. Lyra paced the cargo bay constantly, her fingers brushing the walls, touching the lights, listening to the ship's engines with keen ears. Every sudden sound or shift of gravity made her leap or hunch defensively. Watched silently, heart tight, understanding that this was her way of reading the environment, of understanding him, and of keeping herself safe. He tried to speak to her softly, explaining each sound, each movement. She ignored him at first, but gradually her eyes flicked to his, curious yet cautious. Life aboard the ship was difficult. Lyra refused to eat human food at first, her sharp senses rejecting the textures and smells. She slept in strange positions, half floating, half crouched, always alert. Tried to mimic her calm, offering water in carefully measured sips, showing gestures of patience. Slowly, she began to take these offerings, not with trust yet, but with tolerance. Felt small victories. Every glance she gave him, every moment she lingered near without fleeing, felt like a bridge forming between two worlds. Began to teach her small things, how the controls worked, how to navigate the stars, how to adjust the ship's systems. She learned quickly with astonishing precision, far beyond human skill, realized she had been trapped in the container but not broken. Every lesson became a quiet conversation, unspoken, a dance of gestures and shared understanding. He started to feel proud but also cautious. Lyra was untamable and her spirit could not be caged. Yet she allowed him to be present in her life, a witness to her curiosity. Nights were quieter. Lyra would sit by the observation window, staring at the streaks of stars outside. Would join her, pointing out constellations, telling stories about human worlds, laughing quietly at the idea of planets with floating cities or seas of liquid gas. She listened, tilting her head, occasionally mimicking a gesture or sound. Felt a strange warmth, hope, he realized, something he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he sensed that Lyra was choosing to let him share in her life, even if she would never belong to anyone completely. But tension remained. One evening, a turbulence warning flashed. The ship rocked violently, and Lyra shrieked, a sound unlike any human cry. She scrambled across the bay, arms pressing against the walls to steady herself. ran to her, grabbing her shoulders, speaking words she couldn't understand, but the tone carried care. Slowly, her breathing steadied. She turned to him, eyes wide, but no longer full of fear, just alertness. Realized then that survival had become a shared experience. Trust wasn't demanded. It was earned in moments like this, forged in quiet gestures and mutual respect. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra fell into a rhythm. They ate, slept, explored, and learned to move in the same space without fear or conflict. Every discovery was a wonder. Lyra pointed out nebulae and tiny sparks of alien light he would have missed, while introduced her to human songs and stories. They laughed together in ways words could not capture, learning to communicate through gestures, glances, and shared experience. By the time they reached the outer edges of known space, realized something profound. Lyra had not been tamed, nor should she be, but she had accepted him into her life, and had changed too. He had begun to see the universe through her eyes, wild and untamed, full of danger but also beauty. For the first time, he felt that being human was not a limitation. It was a gift, a bridge to connect with something truly extraordinary. As the stars stretched endlessly before them, looked at Lyra. She gazed back, her eyes reflecting galaxies. Neither spoke, but both understood. This journey was more than a trip through space. It was the beginning of a bond that could never be predicted, a bond built not on control or possession, but on respect, trust, and the courage to walk together into the unknown. Weeks passed as Lyra drifted through the quiet darkness at the edge of known space. Had grown used to her strange rhythms and sudden movements, and she in turn had begun to acknowledge his presence without flinching. Their bond was still fragile, built on small gestures and quiet understanding, but it was real. He felt a strange joy in sharing space with her, yet a lingering curiosity remained. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she been trapped in that container? One evening, as the ship floated near a deserted, rocky planet, Lyra approached a control panel had barely touched. Her fingers traced the buttons, her movements precise and deliberate. Then suddenly the console sparked, and a holographic image flickered to life. The light illuminated Lyra's face, showing a mixture of fear and awe. The hologram displayed her, a planet bathed in vibrant colors, forests glowing faintly, and cities that seemed to float above the surface. But the vision quickly shifted, showing destruction, fire, and silence. Realized she had been looking at the memory of her civilization. Lyra backed away, covering her mouth with her hands, a soundless whimper escaping her lips. Reached out instinctively, but she waved him back, her gaze distant. He watched as her body shook, not with anger or threat, but with grief. The container she had lived in for so long had been a prison, but also a shield, protecting her from the horrors she had endured. Felt a tightness in his chest, the kind that comes when you witness someone's pain and realize how powerless you feel. He spoke softly, trying to comfort her, using words she might not understand, but tones she could sense. Lyra slowly turned to him, eyes shimmering with unspoken emotion. Could see the complexity in her gaze, sorrow, anger, loneliness, and a faint trace of hope. She had survived something unimaginable, and yet here she was, fragile and fierce, alive in his small ship at the edge of the universe. He understood then that she was not just an alien. She was a survivor carrying the memory of an entire world on her shoulders. Wanted to ask questions, but he knew some things could not be forced. Instead, he stayed silent, sitting beside her as she pressed her hand against the hologram. She traced the destroyed cities, the broken forests, as if trying to remember every detail, every color. He realized that this was her connection to home, to a world she could never return to, and somehow he felt honored to witness it, even from a distance. Later, as the hologram faded, Lyra turned to fully. Her eyes held a depth he had never seen before. No words were spoken, but felt the message clearly. She had lost everything, yet she was choosing to stay alive, choosing to be here, choosing in some quiet way to allow him to be part of her journey. For the first time, he felt that their bond had weight and meaning beyond curiosity or survival. It was something deeper, built on trust, shared understanding, and respect. Reached out gently and took her hand. She did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. Lyra's body relaxed slightly, her shoulders easing from their usual tension, felt hope swell in his chest. She was untamable, wild, and free, but she had allowed him into her life, and that, he realized, was a gift more precious than anything he had ever imagined. As the ship floated further into darkness, looked at the stars and then at Lyra. She looked back not with fear, not with aggression, but with something almost human, a flicker of trust, of connection, of recognition. The revelation of her past had been painful, yet it had drawn them closer. Knew now that their journey would not just be across space, but into understanding, empathy, and perhaps even love. And he was ready for it. For the first time, felt that they were no longer just two beings sharing a ship. They were companions, survivors, explorers of the unknown, bound not by ownership, but by choice, trust, and the quiet courage to face the universe together. The quiet of space was deceptive. And Lyra had grown used to long days of silence, small lessons, and tentative trust, but the universe had its own rules. One afternoon, a sharp warning flashed on the ship's main console. An unknown fleet had appeared on the sensors, moving fast, weapons locked on their trajectory. Pirates. His heart thumped in his chest. He had dealt with minor threats before, but never anything like this. His mind raced, there was no time to hide. Lyra, seated nearby, stiffened immediately. Her eyes glowed faintly, the colors shifting as if reflecting the urgency in her mind. Barely had time to shout a warning before she sprang into action. She moved with impossible speed, crossing the cabin in seconds, her body flowing like water around obstacles. His breath caught in his throat. This was the same creature who had once been frightened by a falling crate, now a force of calculated strength and precision. She was untamable, yes, but deadly in her own way. The pirate's ships closed in, and Lyra's instincts took over. With a sudden burst of energy, she touched the ship's control panels, rerouting power, activating defenses in ways had never imagined. Shields shimmered to life, energy pulses streaked across the hull, and the first pirate vessel faltered. Watched, mouth open, as she leapt from console to console, disabling weapons, shutting down engines, and moving with deadly grace. Every motion was fluid, elegant, and terrifying. Realized something important in that moment. Lyra had survived far worse than any human could imagine. The container had kept her safe, but it had not dulled her instincts or her strength. She was capable of things beyond his comprehension. And now, in a moment of crisis, she had chosen to protect him, not because he commanded it, not because he forced it, but because she had decided it was worth it. His chest tightened. Trust was not given. It was earned, and she had given it fully in that moment. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. By the time the pirates, their ships damaged and retreating, was breathing hard, sweat on his forehead, while Lyra stood silently, calm once more. She looked at him, eyes glowing faintly, unreadable but not hostile, took a cautious step forward and extended his hand. She hesitated, but then brushed it lightly. It was a small gesture, but it was monumental. He realized then that she had not only survived the attack, but had chosen to involve him in the outcome. He was no longer just an observer or caretaker. He was a partner in survival. The realization filled him with awe. Lyra, untamable and wild, had offered him a place beside her in the chaos of the universe. It was an honor he did not take lightly. After the immediate danger passed, repaired the minor damage to the ship while Lyra floated quietly nearby, eyes scanning the stars. He tried to speak to her, explaining the attack, the pirates, and the danger they had faced, but words seemed insufficient. She listened, tilting her head, and for the first time understood that communication with her would always be more than words. It would be gestures, glances, shared experience, and trust earned in moments like this. That night, as the ship drifted in calm space, sat near the observation window, watching Lyra trace patterns in the stars with her fingers. He realized that the universe was vast, dangerous, and unpredictable. But he also realized that they were no longer alone in it. Together, they had faced a test, and they had survived. And understood something even more profound. The bond they shared, fragile and new, had been strengthened in fire, forged not by control or command, but by respect, courage, and the willingness to trust. For the first time, felt certain that the journey ahead, through stars, dangers, and unknown worlds, would be shared. Lyra remained untamable, fierce, and free, but she had chosen to walk beside him. And in that choice found hope, wonder, and the quiet, powerful certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the ship's windows, vast and silent, as if waiting for something remarkable to happen. Watched Lyra move through the cargo bay, her every motion graceful, untamed, and full of life. She paused near a small observation platform, her hands brushing the rails, her eyes reflecting the countless worlds outside. Felt a deep swell of emotion, pride, awe, and something he had not expected. Love. Not possession, not control, but a quiet, unwavering love for a being who had chosen her own path and yet included him in it. They had faced the unknown together, the quiet days of learning, the tension of mistrust, and the danger of pirates. Each challenge had brought them closer, not by breaking her spirit, but by allowing them both to grow and adapt. Realize something profound. Lyra would never be tamed, never fully under his control, and that was the most beautiful thing about her. Her freedom was her strength, and in that freedom she had chosen him. The ship finally reached a quiet moon, small and serene, far from the chaotic trade routes and hidden dangers of the universe. Guided it down gently, feeling the ground beneath them tremble slightly with the moon's subtle gravity. Lyra floated near him, observing the rocky terrain with fascination. She leaned down to touch the soil, feeling its texture, its weight. Watched, heart full, as she took tentative steps on the moon's surface, then leapt gracefully, her laughter echoing in a sound that was half musical, half wind. For the first time, she moved without fear, without hesitation, completely alive. Followed her outside, feeling the thin air brush against his face. He watched her explore, touching strange plants, peering into tiny pools of water, testing gravity with jumps that left him smiling in disbelief. She was untamable, yes, but she was also joyous and free. Realized that this new beginning wasn't about control or even discovery. It was about companionship, shared wonder, and mutual respect. He had thought he had rescued her from a container, but in truth, she had saved him from a life of monotony and fear. As night fell over the moon, the sky darkened, revealing a canopy of stars so bright it seemed almost unreal. Lyra stood beside him, her glowing eyes reflecting constellations he had never seen, spoke softly, words meant more for himself than her. "We're alive," he said. "We made it, and we'll keep going together." Lyra turned to him slowly, her expression impossible to read at first. Then, in the quietest of gestures, she touched his hand with her own. It was not ownership, it was not submission, it was acknowledgement. A silent promise that, whatever the universe held, they would face it side by side. Smiled, letting the enormity of the moment wash over him. They didn't need words. They didn't need plans or promises. The universe was dangerous, unpredictable, and vast, but that vastness now felt like an invitation. Together, they could explore, survive, and marvel at the wonders around them. Lyra's freedom and his human curiosity had become intertwined, creating something new, something rare, a bond that neither could break, not even if the stars themselves tried. As they settled on the moon, building a small shelter together, realized the truth. The container he had bought at an unremarkable auction had brought him the most extraordinary being in the galaxy. She had been untamable, fierce, and free, yet she had chosen to be with him. That choice, he knew, was more precious than any treasure or artifact he had ever imagined. It was trust, respect, and the quiet, profound power of two lives meeting across impossible odds. Looked at Lyra, standing at the edge of a cliff, her hair flowing like liquid light in the wind. He understood then that adventure, wonder, and connection were not about control. They were about being brave enough to share the unknown with someone extraordinary. And as he stepped forward, hand reaching toward hers, he knew that this was only the beginning. They would not be bound by the past, nor by fear. They would be bound by choice, courage, and the endless, wild beauty of the universe, and together they would embrace it all.